Hey guys, Monday, October 12th is Genocide Day in America, so I figured I would make a video concerning why I despise Christopher Columbus, and furthermore, why there should not be a holiday named after such a greedy, murderous, sociopathic criminal. First of all, Christopher Columbus was not the first to discover the Americas. He was in fact probably the last. The Norse were known to have traveled across the Atlantic several times and even traded with the Native Americans. They had colonies on Iceland as well as Greenland, and often imported wood from the Canadian coast to settlements on Greenland. Columbus would have known about the Americas since he claimed to have sailed to Iceland in 1477. A great deal of archaeological evidence supports earlier discoveries of the Americas, but the credit is always given to Columbus. This kind of thing isn't new, however. Bartolomé Diaz was recognized as the first to sail around the Cape of Good Hope in 1488. Prince Henry the Navigator was credited with discovering the Azores and sending ships to sail around Africa between 1415 and 1460. However, the Phoenicians and Egyptians were known to have accomplished these feats before 600 BC. This to me is a bit ironic, seeing as how Henry's knowledge of these feats motivated him to repeat them. This kind of ethnocentrism is seen quite often throughout Western history. The only important discoveries seem to be those made by white males. Without going into too much more detail about the previous discoverers of America, let's move on to Columbus himself. Columbus received funding for his voyages from the King and Queen of Spain, Ferdinand and Isabella. They appropriated him with 3 ships, as we all know, the Nina, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria. The trip took roughly a month, and they experienced fairly smooth sailing up until they reached the land. The second that Columbus stepped ashore on the island of Hispaniola, he claimed the land and the people as his property, or the property of the Spanish monarchy. He even wrote in his journal, quote, "I could conquer the whole of them with 50 men, and govern them as I pleased." End quote. On his way back to Spain after his first voyage, he kidnapped between 10 and 25 Arawak Indians, as well as many exotic birds, gold, and other indigenous items, and brought them back to the king and queen. Unfortunately, only 7 or 8 Indians actually survived the voyage. As a result of his achievements, Ferdinand and Isabella granted Columbus a second voyage, with 17 ships and upwards of 1,500 men. When he returned in 1493, he demanded that the natives give him all the gold, food, spun cotton, and women that he and his fellow sailors desired. If an Indian were to disobey, he was made an example of by cutting his ear or nose off and returning him to the village. After a while, the Indians became increasingly angry and resistant toward the Spanish. They eventually decided to fight back. Unfortunately, the natives' primitive weapons were no match for the technology and resources of the Spanish, and many were killed. Unfortunately for Columbus, no vast gold reserves had yet been found. So the Spanish rounded up about 1,000 Arawak Indians. Half were sent to Spain in lieu of gold, and the other half were kept as slaves on the island. The rest were released. According to eyewitness accounts, the remaining Indians fled as far and as fast as they could from the Spanish. Some mothers even left their infant children on the ground in order to escape faster. Some even fled far away from the Spanish settlements, more than a week's worth of journey. Columbus wrote to Ferdinand and Isabella, quote, "In the name of the Holy Trinity, we can send from here all the slaves and Brazil wood which could be sold." End quote. Columbus, upset at the fact that he had not yet found the vast gold which he was sure existed somewhere on the island, set up a tribute system with the remaining Indians. All those 14 years of age or older who lived near the mines were to pay a hawk's bell full of gold dust every 3 months. All others paid a tribute of 25 pounds of cotton every 3 months. After 3 months, you brought your tribute to the Spanish and were given a token, which enabled you to live for 3 more months to collect the next tribute. All those found to be with outdated tokens had their hands cut off. The tribute system eventually broke down because what it required of the Indians was impossible. Columbus eventually created what was called the encomienda system, which was a type of forced labor in which entire Indian villages were the property of a colonist or group of colonists. Slavery, essentially, though it was not labeled as such because Isabella hated slavery. These systems of slavery and tribute caused the population of the Arawak to plummet. Many Indians chose to commit suicide, and at times 100 or so chose to die in mass suicides. Women refused intercourse and childbearing, often aborting their own children or strangling them immediately after childbirth in order to liberate them from a life of despair, torture, and slavery. Due to the fact that the Indians labored endlessly in the mines, crops failed and many Arawaks suffered malnutrition. Some Indians tried escaping to Cuba, but were followed by the Spanish and eventually recaptured. Smallpox hadn't arrived on the island until 1516, but also resulted in thousands of more deaths, though to Columbus's defense, germ theory was not yet known or understood at this time, and so obviously I don't blame him for these deaths. The pre-Columbian population on Hispaniola is estimated to have been as much as 8 million natives. By 1496, just 4 years after Columbus's arrival, the population dropped to about 3 million. By 1516, thanks to an Indian slave trade initiated by Columbus, the number dropped drastically to just 12,000. By 1542, there were just 200, and by 1555, the Arawak Indians had been completely eradicated from the island of Hispaniola. Many other native islanders in the Caribbean have experienced similar fates, as well as Western Africans, and even on his deathbed, Columbus never knew that the lands he discovered were not actually the West Indies, but the New World. A college history professor once told me that in order for something to be labeled as genocide, there must be intent. Columbus knowingly worked these Indians to their deaths. He pushed them into committing suicide and even killing their own innocent children to escape the horror of their despotic regime, all under the guise and authority of Christianity. So I ask you, why do we celebrate Columbus Day? What good did Columbus accomplish in his lifetime? Why do we celebrate a man who slaughtered and or enslaved an entire population of otherwise innocent human beings? And why is this part of history not widely known or taught to a large number of students? I have no problem celebrating the discovery of America. We can call it America's Day or Discovery Day or something along those lines. The Bahamas calls this day Discovery Day. Venezuela calls it the Day of Indigenous Resistance, and many Latin American countries call it the Day of Race or the Day of the Culture. There is no need to perpetuate the name of such an appalling figure in history. I think that calling this holiday Columbus Day is a slap in the face to indigenous peoples all over the world. You would be hard-pressed to find a culture anywhere in the world that hadn't been oppressed, harassed, enslaved, or slaughtered by Europeans at some point in history. And Columbus is a perfect archetype in representing this type of repression worldwide. So please, tell me what you think about this often not talked about holiday. What are your thoughts regarding Christopher Columbus? And what do you think, if anything, should be done about this? Is this a non-issue? I submit that it is not. So again, as always, thank you for watching, and please rate and subscribe if you liked the video. Thank you.